right at we're right at 4:30. So are we ready to begin?
Sure.
Great. Okay. Well, welcome to our second session on Paris here. With the main reading is from Walter Benjamin, who was considered perhaps the leading intellectual of Weimar Germany. He started with literary work.
Are you gonna go?
Or you can stay. It doesn't matter.
I'm gonna play I need my the volume on that's tick.
Okay.
Yeah, we often turn off the volume, please, if we have background noise, and then turn it on if you're just about ready to talk, please. From the literary work, he then did a book on Berlin, which he knew from personal experience in detail. Then, to contrast, he and many intellectuals, literary people in Weimar Germany, they tended to divide themselves, and the literary people and let's say the intellectuals tended to be on the left, which was dominated by the Communist Party and Marxism. On the right, you had the Nazis in the streets, and there were battles for years through the 1920s and 30s, triumphing in 1933 with Hitler. But then after that, we had questions of what to present and how to conceive of what is useful for Germany and then internationally. And so we have a legacy which he wrote about. He was engaged with these issues very deeply, and he had a certain public. But then in the late 20th century, the issues of industrialization, industrial society, which were so central and a symbol of progress for Marx and for many people in the 19th century, the British market of Adam Smith as well was sort of seen as the future and the driver. And in the first page, read very closely the first page. He summarizes the multiple themes. Industry then gets transformed into a phantasmagoria. What's the phantasmagoria? We could call it an ethos, we could call it an image, we could call it false consciousness in the Marxian manner. And clearly he's not cited. Most of his big sources are not cited here at all. But here it's Max Weber, as well as other kinds of romantic paintings and perceptions of culture, as well as the photograph. He wrote extensively on photography. So he then went back and forth between Paris and the rest of the world briefly, but I would say the rest of the world joined this really when industry was in decline. The traditional way of building an economy and a political system had changed. So in China, to take perhaps the most dramatic example of rapid recent change, the Chinese are now actively engaging, as I've said a couple of times, the consumption economy, a consumption mode of thinking and architecture we'll go through later today. But how to do this, people then rediscovered the work of Benjamin, and Harvard University Press brought out 3 volumes, of which the main one we have here is the Arcade Project. It was never finished by him, but it at least these volumes then became very, very much bestsellers, very popular, and Benjamin has probably a much wider worldwide following today than ever. he was way ahead of his time. The three books are all essays. They were not finished books, but the Paris essay that we're reading is really a very tight, coherent overview. It includes lots of technical terms that are confusing, but they are explained briefly here in some cases, but in generally more detail in the rest of the book. We did find, Alan, I believe, a PDF of the whole book. If we have not, maybe we could put that on Canvas, if that would be okay. It doesn't have to be right now, but it's at the end of the session. Then if you're confused about some of these terms or references, you can probably find a lot of them in Wikipedia, but you also can find them in his own words there. So we want to give you an overview and a sense of the excitement and a feel for it, instead of just these abstract names or words. I've spent a couple of days finding all kinds of interesting videos that give you a little more of a feel for this. The city of Paris was an old city with narrow streets, and in 1789, of course, it was the center of the guillotine, the revolution, and in the central square, right in front of what's become the National Assembly, Place de la Concorde, you had the guillotine chopping off the heads of leading political and aristocratic figures. Then in 1848, there was a revolution, which was often led in the Paris Commune, it was called, from little streets, little narrow streets that the revolutionaries barricaded up so that the police and the army could not get in. And then they would shoot back, they would throw bombs and fire stuff and things of that sort. So the prefect of Paris, Haussmann, was charged to rebuild Paris. And let's look at how that happened. This is the first video, please. Haussmann's Paris renovation, which Alan can give us. And it's fine to, yeah, so here, this is the first section as well. And so what Alan has been doing yesterday, Monday, he discovered this brilliant idea. He's been showing you the background of his reading next to the videos, and that's a guide for you to follow in the future. All right, video, please.
In 1845, a French social reformer wrote, "Paris is an immense workshop of putrefaction, where misery and pestilence and disease work in concert, where sunlight and air rarely penetrate. Paris is a terrible place, where plants wither and perish. Industrialization and rapid growth had simply left infrastructure behind, and in the 19th century, Emperor Napoleon III undertook one of the most ambitious plans of renovation ever undertaken in any city, anywhere. And to oversee that renovation, he chose the skillful and audacious George Eugene Haussmann. And between 1853 and 1870, Haussmann transformed Paris from a squalid, disease-ridden city of the Middle Ages to the modern era with broad avenues, effective sewers, beautiful parks. It is history that deserves to be remembered." By the 19th century, the overcrowding of Paris had become an acute social issue. As far back as 1739, the writer Voltaire had complained that the streets were showing off their filthiness and spreading infection. The first Napoleon had ambitious plans as well, writing from his prison on St. Helena, that if he had had 20 more years of rule and a little leisure, one would vainly search today for the old Paris. Nothing would remain of it but vestiges. The widest streets in the worst neighborhoods were only 5 meters, the narrowest only 2. Carts and horses could hardly navigate these parts of the city. Elected the first president of France in 1848, Napoleon III worked as president to beautify the city, but was able to accomplish very little. It wasn't until he overthrew the government and declared himself emperor that the project would begin in earnest. After selecting Haussmann to oversee the project, the emperor asked him to give the city more air and space, to make it beautiful and to better connect the sprawling capital. The first stage of the project was to complete the Grand Croisée de Paris, a great cross that would bisect the center of the city, and which had begun under the first Napoleon. The emperor wanted a new hotel built, the first luxury hotel in the city, the Grand Hôtel du Louvre, in time for the Exhibition Universelle in Paris. The exhibition was a kind of World's Fair held in 1855. It was held partially as a response to the Great Exhibition held in London 4 years earlier. Hosmann relished the challenge and worked 24 hours a day, had 3,000 workmen finish the most important parts of the cross and the hotel in time for the exhibition. The project involved tearing down enormous sections of the city, a task that Hosmann called the gutting of old Paris. Many of the neighborhoods torn down were simply turned into the broad avenues that define the city today, and many small streets were eliminated entirely in favor of one navigable one. This was only possible because Napoleon III had made himself emperor. He had the parliament change the law so that Hosmann could seize land on either side of the streets, and he reported only to the emperor himself. Hosmann finished the cross in 1859, centered at a large square that was widened with 2 new theaters, which still stand today, facing each other across the Fontaine de Palmer, a victory fountain built under Napoleon I to memorialize his greatest military victories. The fountain itself was moved to sit at the exact center of the square and redecorated with sphinxes and more, designed by architect Gabriel Davioud. Davioud was almost as important to the project as Hosmann. While Hosmann worked on the greater design of the city, Davioud was the architect for many notable buildings built during this time, including the theaters in the central square, as well as other distinctively Parisian street furniture. He designed benches, balustrades, fountains, signposts, and much more during the renovation. This work, as well as that of other architects under Napoleon III, had a unique style, much of which can still be seen all over Paris today. One architect who designed during this time called the style simply Napoleon III. Possibly the most distinctively Hosmann part of the whole renovation were the buildings he built to line the streets of Paris. Hosmann planned the apartment complexes as architectural wholes, treating them, as he treated everything in the project, as part of a larger urban design. While the interiors of the building were left up to the owners, the exteriors were strictly regulated. Uniformity of balconies and cornices was prioritized, even to the detriment of interior rooms. The facades were required to be either made or faced with stone, and the changes of the Industrial Revolution made it possible to cut and move the stone like never before. It is Hosmann's apartment.
Okay, that's for Hosmann.
Okay, excellent. Several of the themes right there are the themes in the essay that we're reading. So we have a section on Hosmann and a section on the barricades a little bit below. Then there's one immediately at the beginning on Fourier and the arcades. The arcades gave the project, the book of Benjamin, the title, The Arcades Project, because they specifically put together the elements of luxury in an image, but the most important is they were also the theme which we'll develop further in just a second. What if we go ahead and show that arcade video, please? Let's see.
An intoxication comes over the man who walks long and aimlessly through the streets. With each step, the walk takes on greater momentum. Ever weaker grow the temptations of bistros, of shops, of smiling women. Ever more irresistible the magnetism of the next street corner, of a distant square in the fog, of the back of a woman walking before him. Then comes hunger. He wants, however, nothing to do with the myriad possibilities offered to sate his appetite, but like an animal he prowls through unknown districts in search of food, in search of a woman, until utterly exhausted he stumbles into his room, which receives him coldly and wears a strange air. That anamnestic intoxication in which the flaneur goes about the city not only feeds on the sensory data taking shape before his eyes, but can very well possess itself of abstract knowledge, indeed of dead facts, as something experienced and lived through. This felt knowledge, as is obvious, travels above all by word of mouth from one person to another. From The Arcades Project by Walter Benjamin.
Okay, the term flaneur, F-L-A-N-E-U-R, central concept here, came from Balzac, who started thinking and writing in these terms. That is, what we have here is not just what you saw shown in the video, or the two videos of the physical structure of Paris. More important for the French, who have this grand theoretical perspective they bring to most everything. The flaneur is an ideal of articulated as well in the film we saw last time, Marcel Proust, where Proust's imagery of this is not just a quote description, it is his imagined regaining of time. That is, he can recreate this in his head, and that's what the film tries to do, to go a flashback to the salons through the whole 19th century into the court of the 18th century and earlier. And in similar manner, the idea of the flaneur is that he's not just hungry and walking and looking at the structures, he also is using this to sort of intellectualize, to ask himself, to think about, to write about. That is, it does not say that he talks to anyone. In contrast with often the German, the Italian, the Spanish, the African-American ideal of the stroll, where people would talk to one another. The idea of the flaneur is that he thinks about this. He tries to sort of build I won't say a theory, but at least he has images of intellectualizing in ways that Balzac wrote books. Balzac and then Baudelaire, the key source here, wrote books about the city, about the streets, about the neighborhood, which was the artistic neighborhood, which we had to have in order that creativity for the artist could take off. And how can we help that happen? What should be in that sort of neighborhood? What sort of style? Okay, so we have the section here, Granville, or the World Expositions. You saw a quick shot on that. We have Louis Philippe, then the interior decoration themes, and here we have more Marx saying the bourgeois, the term bourgeois is really added to stress that kind of linkage. Then we have the section on Baudelaire, or the streets of Paris. All right, this is what we can explore further here. Is this is where the flaneur is introduced more systematically, and the flaneur was not featured this way even in the introduction to the book, which was not really a book, it was a separate essay, but that was first in 1935. 1939, the flaneur becomes much more central as Benjamin himself was putting this together. And that's probably the major single concept to take out of this, of the flaneur circled in blue right here on Alan's text. So what can we see about the flaneur, and what are the sources? What's the major source that Benjamin used? The work of one poet. So he has about 1,000 pages in this book of notes, and more than anything else, they're drawn from the eyes, the mind, the sharp gaze of the wandering Baudelaire around the streets, whose articulation in poems, in essays, brought people, and the image of that which continued, that is the image of Baudelaire, which then got crystallized and is read today, and as you will see in some websites and contemporary American versions. But this created the image of Paris, which, and specifically of a sort of bohemian, abstraction, which not only attracted the rural French, but also the Russian ballet, Picasso, Ezra Pound, James Joyce, and has become today, if you listen to advertisements for American Airlines, you hear Rhapsody in Blue, but especially The American in Paris by George Gershwin. So this is with us today. People are still selling wine, trying to sell airline tickets in a time like right now where that's pretty hard to do. But let's look at a little bit more, please, Alan, on the imagery we have of Baudelaire, starting with a bit of his biography. Here we go.
His bohemian spirit. However, he left the vessel and returned to Paris. At age 21 in the year of 1842, he inherited his father's fortune and began his literary career in the Latin Quarter of Paris. It is believed around this period that he contracted syphilis from frequenting prostitutes. Oh boy. At this time, he met his notorious mistress, Jeanne Duval, a Creole woman of whom his family did not approve. She was one of 4 women who inspired Charles Baudelaire's greatest work, Les Fleurs du Mal. During their lengthy and stormy relationship, Jeanne Duval was emotionally abusive toward Charles. She delighted in toying with him, having affairs with friends of his, getting him hooked on drugs such as hashish and opium, and getting him deeper into debt. So this relationship continued on and off throughout the years. He also had a relationship with painter and model, the beautiful Apollonie Sabatier, and actress Marie Dabrun. Charles was also a big fan of wine and was a famous absinthe drinker. By 1844, he had squandered at least half of his inheritance, prompting his family to fight for a lawyer to handle Charles's finances and provide him with an allowance until his death. His writing career began with art criticism, and he also released an autobiographical novella titled La Fanfarlo in 1847. Prior to releasing Les Fleurs du Mal, his greatest achievement in writing was considered to be his English to French translations of Edgar Allan Poe's work. They are widely considered to be among the best. In 1857, he finally published the first edition of his greatest work, Les Fleurs du Mal. Quite obsessed about ensuring the quality of his work, he took a room next to the publishing house so he could oversee the process. 6 of the poems in the collection, however, were banned in France until 1949, containing subject matter such as lesbianism and vampires. The second edition of Les Fleurs du Mal, he added 35 poems. One of the things Les Fleurs du Mal is known for is its explicit sexual content, the link between beauty and decay, and, significantly, the relationship between death and sensuality. Because of his personal eccentricities and his work, he was dubbed Poète Maudit, the cursed poet in French. One friend even reported that Charles, in the midst of conversation, asked him, "Wouldn't it be agreeable to take a bath with me?" I can imagine his friend was something like, "Dude, I love you, but not that much. Stay back." In the 1860s, Charles's health began to decline. In 1862, he started suffering from horrible nightmares. When he left for Brussels to give some lectures in 1863, a series of strokes left him partially paralyzed. He finally passed away August 31st, 1867, at the age of 46, most likely from syphilis. So, there's a brief biography on Charles Baudelaire, and trust me, it only scratches the surface of the man himself. But Adrian...
Okay, that's the bio.
All right. Why don't we go right ahead to just a little bit more, and we've got short, just usually they're quite short clips to give you a little more flavor of his work.
Another passage in here that I found really fascinating. Griswold is ignorant of the fact that poets, more than any other type of men, enjoy that wonderful privilege attributed to Parisian and Spanish women of having the secret of dressing well with the poorest trifles, and that Poe, lover of beauty in all things, would have found the art of transforming a cottage into a palace of new design. Whoa. Like I said, you really get more of a perspective and more even of an appreciation.
That's one piece.
Sure. And obviously place making is what you hear there, the theme of the course. And here's an actual poem.
And this character who
Check
is
it
depressed is reading this. I believe he's teaching a class in the novel, and he reads from Baudelaire to the class, "Be calm, my pain, and venture to be still. You clambered for the night. It falls, is here. The city shrouds itself in blackest chill, brings peace to some, to others fear. 'Neath pleasure's lash, the grim high executioner Mortal souls, that vile and worthless throng, reap grim remorse amidst the abject ceremony. Pain, take my hand, let us now along. Yeah, good goosebumps there. I love that last line. The city shrouds itself.
Is that a what?
Okay, yeah. Is there one more? Yes, there's 1736.
Yeah, one more.
When blackest chill
I
brings
got-
peace to some, to others fear. That reminds me.
Okay, 17.
Poets of sin and debauchery. Fans of the intensity found in Nietzsche and Sade and Blake, Rimbaud, Henry Miller, the Surrealists, Bataille, Paradise Lost, Edgar Allan Poe, of course, Gothic literature of any kind, Tanizaki, Mishima, the usual suspects on this channel. If you liked anything on this channel, then read Baudelaire. You know, I review dark stuff, typically. It's my thing.
Okay.
And this is...
All right. So, I mean, that's good as a quick reference that it's not unique, but the Gothic, I mean, to have even channels now on social media devoted to Gothic, dark, black, shows that the world is not only the 1950s American Hollywood image of the Ten Commandments, where there's a good guy and the bad guy, and the good guys always win. That still is there, as I said. That's still replayed around Easter by popular viewing of Americans. But at the same time, we've had, especially visibly in the recent generation since 1968, a dark side which comes in as well, and which you could say even fascinates Americans because, or I would say more generally, following Max Weber, it fascinates Protestant Northern Europeans more, for whom this is linked with a sense of individualization and exploring one's soul and one's mind and one's being in ways that is less true in Southern Europe. And the concept of Bohemia, when I've gone to Asia, and that this is what we'll go into next week, is the Asian and the international counterparts. The first reaction when I've talked to Japanese, Chinese, Koreans is, what is Bohemia? What are you talking about? We don't know. The concept does not exist in our countries. Okay, so where and why and how that's changing is it will be a continuing theme. But the second aspect of it, and I'm briefly sort of flashing the phantasmagoria of the American Parisian, Berlin, Frankfurt counterculture, was where and how has this changed with the success of the people who grew up after in 1968, who were in college, who they were themselves the demonstrators. I have asked this of USC students for years, and there was one student who said, well, I said, have you ever heard or asked your parents or your grandparents? And one said, my mother was a Berkeley student. My father was a police guard trying to keep the streets working. And my mother went over and spat at him in his face. However, that in turn led to a closer relationship, and he, the son, and the marriage occurred. But 20 years later, the father became more on the left and the mother went more to the right, using those terms very, very loosely here. But in terms of space and geography and political leadership, a counterexample, if you will, of the Haussmann Paris that we're focusing on here is the whole country of the Netherlands, and in some ways, arguably, much of the Western world has become transformed by the counterculture in the form of not just literal Bohemia, as illustrated by Baudelaire and by Benjamin, but also by the new term, which the French like to think is, oh yes, this is very much our ethos, Bobo. Who can tell us about Bobo? Anybody? Any student want to speak up? What's a Bobo?
It's a portmanteau of two words, bourgeois and bohemian, coined by David Brooke, a New York Times opinion columnist.
Exactly. USC grad, USC trustee at the present time. The French don't know that this was created as a term by a foreigner. They think of it as a quintessential French labeling, and it's used in Russia. It's used in many other places. But the point is, what was Baudelaire or Balzac, a small minority of people attacking the establishment, attacking capitalism, attacking the political leadership, has become the national policy through such things as affirmative action, which is now also used in India, and is highly controversially being used okay, so I won't go on to wander too far, except to say this is now global. These themes are going on around the world in ways that challenge. We did surveys as part of a comparative urban project, and in one meeting we held in The Hague, the capital of the Netherlands, where the Dutch Association of Cities had sponsored, they paid for the full survey of mayors and council members in big cities and little cities. And when the results were presented at the meeting, we learned that the 5 big cities in the Netherlands were very strongly, in conjunction with the national government, forcefully implementing Baudelaire's program, not fully, but let's say substantially. In terms of Amsterdam Amsterdam and Zurich were the most drug-friendly cities in Europe in the 70s, and they attracted people from Africa, from England, from Norway, who would come because drugs were so freely available and so cheap. And so parts of these European neighborhoods and cities redefined them, however, as the wrong place to go if you were from, and this we learned by comparing with the medium size and the small cities in the Netherlands. That was so controversial, however, that the results were never permitted to be published, and the data was seized, and we were never able to analyze it and compare it. So these things are clearly sensitive. Just one more counterpart. When the socialists came to power, I think it was in 1974, with Francois Mitterrand, replacing the sort of legacy of de Gaulle's strong nationalist, central conservative political style. Mitterrand came to power. He didn't quite have enough votes by the Socialist Party, so he formed a coalition with the Communist Party. And for 2 years, they governed France. They nationalized all kinds of things. They were, in a sense, the Netherlands also was following some related policies. Mitterrand himself was a literary man. He wrote and had a background in the Latin Quarter and so forth. He would fit it into this style very comfortably. However, there were reactions again, and they had elections 2 years after the socialist communist regime took power, and many new mayors were elected across France, and many of them were from conservative parties by name, but in fact, they were more like Bobos. And so so then at that point, that very point, just to show how these things, placemaking is a hot issue. I mentioned The Hague and Paris. At that point, we were invited to participate, to co-sponsor. I was president of the International Sociological Association Urban Section, and I worked with the French. And the French got lots of money from the Socialist Party because there was a battle within the Socialist Party as what should we do? Should we stay with the Marxist line with the communists? Should we stay with nationalized industries? Because the banks are moving out, people are taking their money away from France, etc. It wasn't as bad as the coronavirus, but it was massive. There were massive French economic problems at the time. And then you had this active new set of mayors who were saying, we want to be socially liberal. We want to have tolerance of gays, minorities, immigration, and so forth. At the same time, we want to have low taxes. That was a revolution, which we talked about as the new political culture. We have 8 books on it with that title and others. And this was a conference of 200 people. 100 were top Socialist Party thinkers, program writers, the National Assembly and the party organization leaders, and then a same thing of about 100 more who were people participating in our project. We had a similar experience a couple of years later when Bill Clinton was in his second election. The Germans at that point were battling over the Socialist Party. They were losing. They didn't know what to do, I was there with a mayor called Bill Morris, mayor of Waukegan, Illinois, and we had a dinner with one of them said, we are simply doomed to go down. We're losing the polls, and in the next election, we probably will not be in power. Then there was a silence. Bill Morris said, why don't you change your party program? And they change the program. I mean, that is unthinkable. So this is the interpenetration of the ideas and the ideology and who we are, leading to the place making from Haussmann up to the left and the right definitions, which were being deeply transformed and breaking with a roughly century-long definition of the left and the right, as articulated in these new symbolically very important issues. And the core social issues came from where? They were then called social liberalism or progressivism, but they came from people like Balzac, Baudelaire, and in the US Western context, the most important, and she's now spread internationally, Jane Jacobs. She was a political activist fighting against Robert Moses, who wanted to build a freeway right across the east-west, right across lower Manhattan and destroy Greenwich Village. When the word of that came out, she mobilized, there was no Louis Philippe, there was no strong leadership, and she mobilized enough citizen activists that they stopped the project. And the projects like this, she then went on to write The Life and Death of Great American Cities, which is still sort of a manual for how can urban planning and architecture be constructed in ways that respond not to top down, but to bottom up. And the top down and bottom up competing conceptions of how to build places are a central theme through this course. So we see both of them here as well. But let's go on to just the background. Let's maybe scroll down a little bit. Where is this today in the U.S. And then in other places? One guy who's articulated this is named Loren Langman. If we could show a little, I can't find a video of him anywhere, but he just has the text. Yeah, here we go. Here's a picture of him. Has a PhD from the USC. He's a professor at Loyola University, been there much of his career. He has a sort of psychological, psychoanalytic perspective. Then he became active in the civil rights movement, a variety of other things, terrorism, and he's a very smart intellectual. He's very close to, okay. close to the continuation of Benjamin. His theme, his term of the carnivalization of the public sphere is close. You see him citing Habermas, things that are here. A lot of his text could be right out of Benjamin. But the point is, he has said this is not just the Latin Quarter. This is not just Greenwich Village. This is the world. And that the carnivalization through the culture industry has become through advertising. Remember, even United Airlines at least advertises if the music does that. And has, perhaps in oversold labeling of the carnivalization of society, it at least is one strong perspective. However, what has happened in the last 5 years or so? Donald Trump, Brexit. In France, a different version, which is more favorable toward the social liberalism, but we have strong reactions against aspects of this movement, which has been going on, as I described, in the Netherlands. So in some cases, you can suppress the reports. Over time, the truth will out. And we have in the urban case, not to mention the international and the national, but in the urban case, a particularly interesting one and forceful, articulated one is Mayor Ford of Toronto. And let's see what we've got from there.
Rob Ford seemed to live his life trying to prove that you can fight City Hall.
Can you get off my driveway, please? Can you get off my property, please? What don't you understand? Get off the property, partner.
He was the mayor of Toronto from 2010 to 2014, entrusted to lead one of North America's largest cities. And to his core, he pushed the boundaries of the city's civility and conventionality. He was elected by voters of the so-called Ford Nation. His blunt-talking bombast struck a chord with suburban and working-class taxpayers, fed up with the people Ford called big city elites. But it was the images of Ford smoking crack cocaine in the spring of 2013 that gave him global notoriety. The infamous antics and denials that followed
I do not use crack cocaine, nor am I an addict of crack cocaine.
Created a spectacle that became a running joke all over the world.
Yes, I have smoked crack cocaine. But no, do I? Am I an addict? No. Have I tried it? Probably in one of my drunken stupors.
The denials, the apologies.
To the people of this great city, I want to offer a public apology.
The circus that had become his life, all irresistible fodder for hours of late-night comedy.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night! Have I ever smoked crack? Yes, but that was in the past.
Hey! Late-night hosts, he almost seemed to relish the ridicule and, of course, the attention.
Have you watched that video? Have I watched? I felt it.
The drug and alcohol abuse continued.
No, man, no money, man. Ja, man. Because I'm gonna kill the guy. I'm talking to surgery, man. I'll try.
He finally submitted to rehab, all the while running for re-election as mayor in 2014. But it was the sobering diagnosis of cancer that forced him to pause, contemplate, and fight for his life. What followed? Abdominal surgery, chemo, radiation, recovery.
Okay. His brother today is the governor of the province of Ontario, and we have these same very similar themes and style continuing. The Ford, when he was running for mayor initially, said, I'm against the cyclists and the bohemians. Artists and cyclists were his enemy, specifically labeled, but the style, he didn't use the term phantasmagoria. That wouldn't have gotten him elected. But he was running against the Baudelaire legacy. So my point of this is that it's not the simple carnivalization of the world. It is of a minority, or let's say a subculture, but these are still, as we can see clearly, fighting issues in some cases. But where they can be found or implemented or solutions developed, which are not necessarily leading to death or revolution, where we can find cases where these different patterns have been implemented peacefully internationally, are critical also to consider. And Chicago generally has implemented with relatively less revolution. They're individual murders by gangs and others, as we saw with Forrest Stewart's work for sure. But these are not political revolutions in the way that we have in other countries. Just to take two more quick critical examples. After the Berlin Wall went down, the Russians basically said, we're going to privatize and embrace aspects of capitalism in the economy, and our whole political system is going to become individualistic, democratic, and participatory. They did both at once, political and economic. The Chinese basically said, we want to liberalize, we want to have the free market in the economy, but we do not want to change the political system rapidly the way the Russians did, because that could lead to revolution. And if you read Max Weber, he wrote about this, the major fragmentation between the political national pattern and the economic local pattern is going back for centuries in Chinese tradition. So this was not it was not new, but the point is, the Chinese today have been gradually, like Chicago, looking for ways of implementing some of these new placemaking activities. As Chicago is, like China, Chicago has sought explicitly to deeply transform the entire city, and has been successfully doing so. And both have been, I would say, relatively successful in doing so in certain areas, at the same time that you have active opposition to everything in some others. But you do not have what bordered on, I won't say anarchy, but let's say terrorist revolution. And Putin had some real problems when the so-called Pussy Girls demonstrated and were given prison sentences. That led to huge criticism and opposition internationally. But the point is, that kind of political activism you did not get in, that is, Putin was able to redefine the issues away from those domestic social liberalism issues. And when he moved toward things such as the Olympics and engagement with the Middle Easterners, that has led, and most of all, if you will, the regaining parts of Ukraine as part of Russia. These led to much domestic support as measured by the polls inside Russia. So juggling these issues are things that are in the minds of major national leaders, from Trump to Putin to the Socialist Party of Germany and France. And you saw the presentation by Qi Ji, how much cultural placemaking is a central concern of China, which is building, Mayor Daley, too, here said, it takes us 10 years to try to put one more runway in O'Hare Airport. The Chinese can build 3 full airports in 10 years, whereas we can't even get ourselves together to have one runway. So the Chinese are just building entire cities of 2-3 million from nothing. And then they're asking, how do we make this place? What will we put into it? Which makes these kinds of discussions much more active, explicit, and heavily funded than they are in most of the rest of the world. Okay. how then can we capture this or codify in ways that it can be looked at in not just in these big revolutionary modes, but also with more specific policies that are closer to what people do. We read the, in the first section, we read about Theaster Gates and how he is a, sometimes has labeled himself a cool capitalist. That is, he's joining the social and the economic in ways where he could be an artist, but also a developer, not really trying to make money, but expand the world with artists being centrally used, which again is Baudelaire and Balzac. A looser, and then we'll explore this more next week, but a looser, another way to go is to redefine Bohemia. That is not to be as strongly committed as Mayor Ford or Baudelaire, but to bring in aspects of tolerance, of gender equality, of spreading equality in various ways, animal rights. There are many other ways that the social issues can be made much more broadly accepted to a wider audience and lead to more specific changes in cities. And one person who's done this very, very thoughtfully is Hee-Sun Chong, who was a collaborator in teaching this course when Brandon took it the last time. And let's look at some, please, of what we have that Alan wants to show us of what she's doing. Here she is speaking in our class this winter. She's, okay.
So it's about Bohemia.
We're not going to show the whole video, maybe just a bit of her presenting, and then we're going to look into some important slides showing
Cafe and the cultural placemaking. The very first question that I had was what makes this was how the culture and the built form relate to walking, biking, and public transit use. A lot of past research have been focused on the role of built environment, on the mood choice and transportation. However, they didn't do any research on the cultural form, which is the way of life, values, or the taste of people. So what is the relationship between cultural environment and commuting and transportation? So I use Bohemia as a cultural form. Originally, it refers to cultural concept.
So basically, we're going to show three parts. The first part is the theory part. It has all these terms defined, and the question schematized. Bohemia is a measurable culture, and this is the definition of it. And there are different theories behind this idea of Bohemia, including what Professor just mentioned, the Bobo by David Brooks, New Bohemia, etc. And this is the relationship between Bohemians and walking. So this is our second part about how Bohemian culture drives alternative transportation, including bicycling and public transit. And this is a painting you can find in Art Institute, Chicago. There are some additional theories. This is Habermas's public sphere theory. That's the earliest one. And another theory is more 20th century concept of third place. Like Starbucks is the embodiment of the third place. And it's a theory by Oldenburg, where it's a place where people socialize outside of the home. the home is the first place, workplace is the second, and places for socializing the third place. And we see that in this graph, cafe is steadily growing. A brewery, interestingly, is also growing, while bar is declining over time from 2005 to 2016. So this shows a bit of, the third place, the idea driving the economy and the growth. And this is the cafe in US, France, and Korea. So US doubled the number of cafe over 12 years, while Korea saw this astronomical growth, surpassing US and France. So we see that in Korea, cafe is a phenomenon that is unbelievably widespread and popular.
That's the most dynamite. Yeah, right here. This is even more dramatic. Look at Seoul, 18,000 cafes, which grew from almost nothing 10 years before. So huge, amazing growth. I'll add as well. We've been consultants to the city of Paris and to Seoul for 3 years with Paris, 2 years with Seoul. We published 2 books on Seoul with Won-Oh Jang and the Urban Institute, which is really the mayor's policymaking institute, and had a big conference with a number of these persons and these ideas in Seoul, and feeding into how can Seoul, or now what we're talking about with China and elsewhere, how can these ideas be adapted to a new specific context where they work? So the model of the export-driven production economy was shared by the Japanese, the Chinese, the Koreans. They sold television in a cheap way all over the world and produced things. And the lead corporation, in Japan, you have the big, they're called trading companies like Mitsubishi and Toyota and so forth. And then they sell television, computers, cars, and more. And so when the Starbucks talked with Samsung, the largest the big version of that in Korea, and cafes were introduced via Starbucks into Korea in conjunction with a branch of Samsung. Just a few years later, the proportion of the earlier one showed the Starbucks name, and here you have more specifically broken out franchise coffee shops, which could be either Starbucks or Samsung or anything which is a franchise, versus, and this is the drama, this is showing the real growth is individual created little shops by different people who've done all sorts of innovative things to make them different and distinctive. So go ahead, please.
Okay, and there are some very new, hardly sane experimental cafe in Chicago, but it happened in Seoul, it happened in China as well, like some pet cafe. This is the Sheep Cafe. I myself went into a cat cafe, a lot of good pictures taken there. So this happened in East Asian countries these days, and it's fun going there. A lot of themes incorporated in cafe. And this is the cafe part, and the final part I will show you the alternative transport. The first one is Chicago. So basically the place where there are more bohemian elements like Lakeview, Wicker Park, Uptown. There are more walking space and alternative commuting than other places. And this is the geo map of this. This is Lakeview. This is Wicker Park. This picture is Paris. So they have 80%, more than 80% alternative commuting in these three places where Bohemian scene is live and kicking. And the last slide is Seoul. Yeah, the final slide is the result and finding. In all three countries, walking and public transit are associated with retail density. In US, France, Bohemians are likely commuting by bicycle.
Okay, very good. We've covered lots of stuff very efficiently. Yeah, I'll just mention there. See that one page, Nuit Blanche. That's the white night idea, which is now a central theme being pursued by Qi Ji and Tong Wang, who was in class today. I see if he wants to comment on any of this along with the others, that would be great. So this is okay. So this is now this is the ongoing work with Heesung that I and some of the others are now engaged in, of looking specifically at the idea of cafes and how they differ. In this case, within Chicago, this is one paper we have called Retail Scenes, and there are three simple case studies of Wicker Park, which is bohemian, the corporate utilitarian style, just off Michigan Avenue in the middle of the Loop, where you have tourists and others, fast food, business lunches, and so forth. And then third, in Bronzeville, you have a traditional neighborhood, neighborly, localistic style within the cafe. So the three cafes that we have case studies of to illustrate how these are articulated in the ethos, the phantasmagoria of each of these. So go ahead. So that's here's the second one, which actually is in this historic building of our great architectural significance. Yeah, right there was it's filled with nonprofits and law firms that are sort of bohemian, a little slight, I won't say bohemian, let's say very bobo. And then Bronzeville, where there's a lot of empty land, it's very hard to get any sort of retail started in Bronzeville. So there's lots of discussion of where and how Black culture, civic movement, youth entrepreneurship can create retail, but then also an interactive night scene, as African Americans tend to have the most active nighttime culture. And as we mentioned, the Chinese have, in Qi Ji's presentation, she showed us that something like 60% of the consumption economy in China is nighttime based. And so where and how, after the coronavirus and so forth, or that is during it, where and how can any of this be then linked with the internet is an issue, but more generally afterward, a lot of this is happening, including online dancing and so forth, at night, after dark. And so the creativity of individual cafe owners, individual entrepreneurs of all sorts, is huge and dynamic in these cities. So Seoul is 4 times as big as New York. Shanghai is similar, and so forth. That is, these are transcending enormously what happened earlier in Europe. And then the corporate element of Starbucks was added in the US. But the growth, yeah, so let's just show here the growth of what this is called the new urbanism, which grows out of Jane Jacobs' activities. Protesting has led to things like the Bike the Drive. On Memorial Day in Chicago, all cars are permitted or not permitted, and there's something over 50,000 bikes who go out there and ride. People come in from Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Bike the Drive. Similarly, there's a car-free district. This is Jimin. This is your university. Want to comment on any of that, Jimin, from or you want to wait till next week when we go into Korea in more detail? But anything brief you want to say now, Jimin? Maybe not. Okay. So Alan, do we have a little more here?
So about another article, a paper on design history of China's gated cities. I have found some videos
Great.
about it. Basically, the article documents 3 periods of design history. The lengthy pre-1949, the enclosed courtyard where many people saw in Beijing, the Hutong, and the walled enclosure, 7 families living in one courtyard, that kind of housing, to the communist period, the gated work compounds, the so-called danwei, where people live in the apartments close to the workplace. The apartments usually offered by the work unit. So there is some variation about the work unit depending on how profitable their danwei is. Their living space varies, but not to a great extent, because during this period, under Mao particularly, it's basically quite egalitarian among most of the people, but the elites, they probably have a different way of living. And the post-socialist era after 1978, gradually there are more commercial housing, and it really took flight in 1990s. So you read from this article that in Shenzhen, in 1994, after the visit by Deng Xiaoping to Shenzhen, there was a loosening of commercial housing at the time. So basically, I want to show you, first of all, the feudal monarchy period. I found 2 videos. One is more imperial, and this is also a tourist site in Beijing called Prince Gong's Mansion. And Prince Gong is an important negotiator in the Second Opium War. And he was also in collusion with Emperor Dowager and seized power, during this fight among 8 different regions. So he was very powerful at the time, but this mansion was previously occupied by probably the most corrupt Chinese officials in history, very wealthy, almost topping the list of the richest man ever in world history. And this is He Shen. I guess some of you might know him. So we're gonna take a short visit of this Prince Gong's mansion and see how this imperial style courtyard, enclosed courtyard is like. And this is Chinese, but just take a look at the video. If you don't know Chinese, it doesn't matter at all.
一座神秘的宅邸，位居北京的龙脉。 200年间，这儿的主子富可敌国，位极人臣。谈笑间耍弄了2位皇帝，更是亲手将一个王朝从兴盛拽向没落。缘由，带你揭开史上第1贪官的秘密，走进恭王府。
袁老师，这就是恭王府
哎，这就是恭王府。它这个王府等于是建在北京的一条龙脉上。北京有一条土龙脉，有一条水龙脉。你像故宫，这就属于土龙脉，这儿就属于水。
This is the Forbidden City. The person talking about it is saying that it's resting on the so-called dragon pulse, and the Forbidden City is on the soil dragon pulse, and this Prince Gong's mentioned it on the
对，有
water.
后海。这个王府应该说是在中国目前保留下来的王府里面是最顶级的了，而且呢，这个王府呢，占地面积非常大，6万多个平方，这是顶级的了，最。
And this area covers 60,000 square meters.
最大的王府。
没概念，您就说吧，这个180平的大3居，这相当于多少3居啊
？300多套吧，你除啊。
就一栋楼，
恐怕都不止吧？是吧？一栋楼哪有300多套啊？是吧？26层都是大3居，差不多就这么大。你看啊，这个特别有意思。你看它这门上这铜钉，看见了吗？
看见了。
这个门钉这是象征王府等级。
这恭王府那谁住的呀？那恭王。
恭亲王。
那所有只要住在
Prince Gong。
这王府里的肯定都得是王吗？
这个里边住过一个人物，虽然不是王爷，但比王爷牛大了，份儿大得多。
那比王爷牛大的不就皇上了吗？
还真不是皇上。但是呢，他在清朝的历史上是以巨能贪污而载入史册。
Most corrupt official in Qing Dynasty. 和珅。
和珅全名是钮钴禄和珅，生活在西元1750年到1799年2月，是满洲8旗里整红旗的子弟。传说和珅是清朝历史上资产最多的官员。
多谢。
And he is the favorite of Emperor Qianlong.
袁老师，这和珅什么出身啊？
和珅是侍卫出身。
这么低啊？
侍卫可不低，尤其在。
And He Shen started out as a bodyguard of Forbidden City, but being bodyguard at the time was a pretty, prestigious position. So this is more imperial. Not everybody can live in here, but most of us know the courtyard in Beijing along Hutong, and this is the old courtyard. There are some very small courtyard space in here, but this artist is trying to revitalize the Beijing's old hutongs, adding more windows, adding more perspective, and more scenes within these old buildings.
这个地方其实原来是7个家庭生活的一个空间，是前面这个部分就是对外开放一点，其实这个地方都是一个玻璃，然后这边有一个工作的地方，这边可以有一个喝茶的地方。它是一个更开放，所以其实这个地方我也可以看到前面的房间，然后对面的房间也可以看到这边，但是都是一个放松的一个状态。但这个地方，其实这个地方有一个这样的一个通道门，所以它里面是一个这样的一个私密的一个空间，一个小的院子。我们把这个天花改造成一个玻璃的，然后这个打开之后，我们正好可以看到这个一棵很大的一个树。这个空间就是我觉得很特别，然后我们在这个地方做了一个这样的一个浴缸，所以这个浴缸上面就在这个里面是可以直接看到这个树，我觉得这种体验是很特别。这是最大的房间。我们改造的时候也是有一些挑战，比如说，空间不够的问题，我们是做立体使用一个小空间，因为胡同的房子的特点，面积小，但是它的高度比较高，所以我们可以利用上面的这个立体使用上面的空间，所以我们可以做一些阁楼来增加
胡同就是可以使用的面积。我做过的最小的空间的改造是4平米，我们把这个4平米的空间改造成年轻夫妇带小孩子最少可以临时生活的一个空间，他们可以回到老城区里面生活了。那通过这样的方式，就是我觉得老城区又有一个新的生活了。通过这样的改造，我相信，更多的，比如说带孩子的年轻人，或者老年人，或者外国人，但现在还没有钱，但是想住在胡同里的人，现在已经很有钱人，想住在胡同里面，提供各种各样的人的生活的一个空间。通过这样的改造，我相信这个老城区，变得越来越多样。这种城市是我觉得是理想的一种城市的一种样子。
Okay, and finally, I want to show you the so-called Danwei, the socialist period housing for most Chinese families. And there was a transition from Danwei to the private housing. And this is a video showing the picture of these two different kind of living space. This is the Danwei, and this is the private housing. I guess it's somewhere in maybe the upper middle class probably have access to this sort of private housing in today's China. Danwei is the work unit. Let me show you some pictures.
My parents and all our neighbors work at the same Danwei. My parents' Danwei allocated our apartment when they got married. We did not have ownership of our apartment. The size and quality of apartments depends on the status of the Danwei and one's position in Danwei instead of one's financial status. In the year of 1998, we were informed that the State Council launched a new policy which allowed us to purchase our apartment from Danwei at a discount. This is how we owned our first private housing unit. At the end of the same year, like many other intellectuals did at that time, my parents decided to quit their Danwei and start their own business.
Deng Xiaoping's opening and reform since the 1970s has brought about remarkable economic growth. As a result, income gaps soared in this rapidly commercializing society. A small group of new rich cultivated a new lifestyle. Thus, the difference in private lifestyle and property ownership defined a new middle class. With the strong push of advertising, the stratified private residential communities offer a tangible location for the new middle class to differentiate themselves both financially and culturally. Similarly, Jin Wang uses the term emulative spending to refer to how people in mainland China acquire social prestige by copying the lifestyle of those higher up in the social hierarchy.
I realized that many households
These are some of the ads for this commercial housing using a lot of probably Bolivarian terms
that have similar income level moved out from Danwei neighborhoods to upscale communities. In the meantime, many charming real estate advertisements appeared on billboards, the radio, and the TV saying, "Get away from your birdcage and buy yourself a lifestyle of freedom and classiness." We visited a close friend's new apartment one day. The community garden was so beautiful. The interior design of the apartment has a European style, showing the taste of the family. In 2002, we moved to an upscale community as well. The community garden and swimming pools were kept well. We got Victorian-styled furniture instead of old wooden or bamboo ones that we used to have. We also started to use Western household appliances such as coffee maker and a toaster. We enjoyed our new home and new lifestyle. Now, whenever I see pictures...
Okay, so this is actually not that high-end. I found a video, but I won't show you much about it. This is probably the richest person living in Beijing, and they live in this gated community. And inside this walled community, you can see lots of animals like peacocks, deers, pigeons are fine. Yeah, this is. I'm gonna take you.
这里允许抚摸羊驼马。
Not everyone can access this gated community. These two lead bloggers, they just ordered a restaurants online, and they have this access going in there and taking pictures with all these lovely animals. And this gated community followed, I mean, what was constructed right after the Asian Olympic in 1990s. So basically, the first generation of, you know, the post 1978, you know, reform housing. All right, I've done.
Any quick comments or questions?
I just wanted to bring up the like the explosion of cafes in Seoul that you brought up in the presentation. Like, just because, well, partly because I am from Seoul, and then about like the third place theory. And I think it's really interesting to think about how Seoul has become, within a matter of a decade, the city that has the most Starbucks in the entire world. So it, I think second is New York, I believe. And I think it's really to think about like why like cafes are sort of being the third like place it is. And I think you can kind of think about the rising rent and like the small sort of scale of housing units that people can inhabit in such a big city. And then that sort of, I guess, in a sense, made people want or desire like a space that's an extension to where they actually live. And I think also like Instagram and social like media has also definitely contributed to the explosion of cafes in Seoul. So I think all these like different trends really kind of I guess manifest in like urban placemaking. And I feel like with like globalization as well as like social media and like other internet communication technology, I think it's really interesting to see how these like different forces really kind of manifest into like urban placemaking. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that.
I mean, I too was, when I saw that number, I had exactly your reaction, but maybe with 5 exclamation points, that this just transcends everything in scale and numbers and speed. Anything we've seen before, including Paris and New York, Chicago, whatever, it looks just tiny by comparison. So we're in the middle of this. So Hee-Sun has done her PhD. She's now an assistant professor at the University of Texas. We've got about 100 pages of draft material, and we're exploring those and more. But if people have ideas or data or hypotheses, an example of what we still have very little about concretely is what do people specifically do and talk about in the cafes, and how does that vary? So we have some examples from Chicago, but if we could get some more from Seoul and China, from Paris, to compare and get a flavor. For instance, when McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken opened up in places like Paris and Rome, this generated a huge slow food movement to fight against the fast food, which conflicted with what the Romans and the Parisians felt was a proper Parisian lifestyle. That's not happened in Seoul. And so it's not as if these things happen necessarily easily. You can clearly have conflict and disagreements, whether it doesn't have to be violent, but it can be visible and strong enough in having websites. And that in turn led to the creation of slow food websites inside the US that were trying to say, let's not eat so fast, let's not, and this is a big question mark, destroy the family legacy or the social legacy. And how this is related to the decline or the slimming of the family, as we've written about, is one question. But I'm simply saying the range of these factors and detailing the specifics there's almost nothing. That there are several descriptive little case studies, but to pull this together as as we're now doing with Heesun in the lead, has been terrific. So we'd welcome any help in the ways of discussion board comments or more active ideas for research, even if you, okay, Tong Wong, please give us any comment.
Yeah, it's just a quick comment. I liked how we just saw the Danwei video, and that reminded me a lot about sort of time I was growing up, because I grew up in a Danwei neighborhood, a Danwei building, and so I was born in Beijing, and my mother works in the Central Iron and Steel Institute, Iron and Steel Research Institute, and so our building was the Danwei building attached to the workplace, and remember sort of growing up and my parents talking about it, there was this real sense of the sense of neighborhood and community, because people working in the same sort of workplace, they're all living together also in this Danwei neighborhood. And there's this sense of you knowing everybody in your building and all your neighbors, and you often exchange goods or you eat at other people's homes, and because you're all very familiar. And with this whole economic sort of reform that sort of transcends this earlier sort of more community Danwei lifestyle, that some people are owning their own apartments or moving away from Danweis, and now our building has a lot of sort of outside people renting rooms and apartments inside the old Danwei building. So there's a change in that kind of social relation and that kind of community lifestyle that used to exist, say, 2 decades ago. And there's also sort of this trend of new commercial neighborhoods, new commercial districts opening up, sort of people moving out from these Danwei neighborhoods, and sort of maybe outside migrants moving into old Danwei neighborhoods because they're cheaper. So that I guess that trend is happening, and that sort of is changing the way that I guess social relationships inside these communities, inside these neighborhoods and beyond. So it's a comment that I have about that.
Oh, great. There are just a handful of studies that are trying to capture this, such as changes in the public housing in Chicago. It's the same way as this tearing down those high-rise public housing in Chicago and replacing them with what's called mixed income housing. Is that working or not? We still don't really know. We've got beginnings, but these are hot issues around the world. Anyone else? Well, right. Yes, end up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Bohemian lifestyle, because the first appearance of Bohemia was in the English language in the 19th century, right? And it was described as an unconventional lifestyle. It's marginalized, but I have experience living in Sweden and in Denmark, Copenhagen, and they have this kind of lifestyle called fika, that they have coffees in cafes every day at 3 or 4 p.m. and they use public transportation a lot, and they use bicycles. And yeah, I was just wondering, like, why the Nordic countries are like more bohemian than the other parts of the world.
Very big question. Maybe the quick answer is we're still studying it, and we've got hypotheses in some of the readings which are here, but we still don't have as comprehensive an answer as we would like. So we need the help of everyone in the class, and these are big issues for urban leaders, planners, investors, national and local governments, as most people in the world now live in medium, in urban metropolitan areas, at least, both suburban and central city. But where and how you can capture or maintain or permit. The other quick point, when we get to the next chapter in the Scenescapes book, these lifestyle differences of exactly the sort you've identified in Denmark, in contrast to other places, are more and more correlated with presidential voting in the US. In the last 5 presidential elections, the relations went from 0 to continually increasing. So the Trump election shows this and let's say the Ford elections in Toronto and Ontario show these political divisions, which are increasingly also affecting where people live. But these are all interpenetrating, and they're big, and there's not one model. That is, Ford, you saw, Ford was ostensibly the conservative on fiscal issues, and he was conservative, and then he represented new immigrants and more manual laborers. And he was anti-bohemian and anti-artist, but he also used dope very openly, and had this kind of, and he was very pro-immigrant. So he explicitly said, you know, we need more immigrants in Toronto, whereas Trump is the opposite. So you can have combinations, even though there may be a style of populism and egalitarianism which is shared among the so-called populists, these new populist leaders, the specifics dramatically differ from place to place, and where and why and how these work out. We've just got a handful of work on this in progress. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Any last comment? These are excellent points. To have people, you know, who've really seen this as you're reporting is wonderful. All right. Well, we're over time. Thank you for participating wherever you are. Some of you are in Saudi Arabia, others are in India, etc. And so you may watch this later, or it may be the middle of night. But we appreciate your participation and welcome discussion board activities. And as we go through the course, we hope you will participate more and we'll learn more from each of you. Bye-bye. See you on Monday. Yeah, well, so Monday we will proceed with the next section. And the idea is to take these ideas of Bohemia and say, this is one, the Bohemia is one in terms of linking to the economic growth with Jane Jacobs, one big Western theory. The second big Western theory is Tocqueville and democracy and participation. And we show that both of these fall flat when you go to Asia. So what can we do to change the theory or understand better why and how the policies can be changed so they match with Asian cultural specifics, or vice versa? How much is Asian lifestyle changing? But it's not as if there's one model that is spreading in simple manner. That is, the more subtle analyses show there changes in many different respects, in terms of family structure, in terms of types of cafes, in terms of other interrelated forms of music. And that's what we begin to explore next week, and then in the subsequent sections of the course. So so what today was with the Parisian, it started really in Paris with Balzac and Baudelaire. They're very strong, dramatic cases. The general idea of Bohemia gets watered down and transformed in many different ways, but at least you've got the background and a dramatic Asian case with Seoul and Shanghai. Okay, onward, and we'll continue on Monday.
Professor, I just wanted to clarify that the midterm is the second class of 5th week, so Wednesday of 5th week.
Yeah, I'll ask one of our TAs if that's right. Short answer is I'm not sure without reading. Is there a conflict on the syllabus, or is it if it's in the syllabus, yes, but is there ambivalence in the syllabus in the syllabus somewhere?
No, the syllabus said second class of 5th week, but then on Canvas it like said a different date, so I just got a little confused.
Yeah, so where on Canvas, I guess?
So I think on Canvas, that's the 2017 course. So for the midterm in 2017, that was a different day. I don't know how that date was still there. Why isn't the new one? But just follow the syllabus. There are a lot of questions asking me this question. What I can say is follow the syllabus. Second session in the 5th week on Wednesday.
Follow the 2020 syllabus, not the 2017 or 2016 syllabus.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, we can have office hours with any other students who are still here and want to talk with us. We're glad